Hi, welcome to this week's Authors Love Readers podcast, where we delve into the stories behind the stories. We're asking authors questions, some of them fun, some of them serious, and from their answers, you're going to learn things you never knew about the people who write the stories you love. My name is Patricia McLinn. I'm your host and designated question asker. Now, let's start the show. Hi, welcome to this edition of Authors Love Readers. Today, my guest is Linda Cardillo. And this is interesting because a lot of the people I've been interviewing, I've known for a long time, forever, basically. I haven't known Linda as long. And we know each other more as readers in a lot of ways than writers, because we are both part of a book discussion group that's all authors, which means we're really cranky readers. I'm a cranky reader. And so I come to this discussion with Linda from a little different direction. Would you agree, Linda?
Absolutely.
Do you find sometimes that you try to predict who's going to react what way to a book?
I think I try to be more flexible about how I approach books, but I know that there are some, and part of it is I think I am in such awe of their critical abilities and what they know about writing books and how they bring that to the reading of books.
I find I'm not particularly great at predicting who will like or not like a book. I'm not even always good about predicting myself. And I think some of it is, we're starting here on a discussion about reading, but I do think some of it is because my theory is that all reading is interactive. And so at least as much as the author puts in, the reader is determining what is taken out of the reading. So a lot of it has to do with my mood and my, what I need to be reading at that point. And sometimes the book that's chosen answers that need, and sometimes it doesn't.
What I find certainly with the books that we've been reading are almost all of them are books I might never have discovered by myself. And yeah, it really is. It's really expanded sort of my repertoire and my willingness to dip into something that, I would have ignored in the past. And sometimes it's very surprising.
Absolutely. And discovered authors I would never have discovered on my own, because I've gone on and read some additional books by authors. And not necessarily that I adored the first book, but there was something in the voice, possibly the worldview or a character that really caught me. And I kept going.
I agree. Yeah. I've done that too. Yeah. It wasn't so much that I loved the first book, but there was something very compelling that pulled me and wanted me to find out more. Yeah.
Well, and as I said, you know what? It's probably what I said at the beginning, that book, that author, that voice answered what I needed at that point. So I kept going back to that. Yeah. I wish there were a better way to do that match. The reader is looking for this sort of experience. This book will have it, but I don't. I think our discovery mechanisms now are really clunky, really, really clunky. I hope this is someplace where technology can help us over the next decade or so. But that's my pie in the sky. So, okay, let's ask Linda some questions. We'll start off with a hard one. Do you have any strong fears, and have you ever used them in a book?
Okay, yes, I do have one strong fear. I'm claustrophobic. I discovered it, this is going back, it was not until I was in my 20s, and I was traveling in the Black Forest with a couple of friends and hiking. And we stayed in this hut overnight that was actually quite large. It was like sort of a dormitory, and it had these sort of stacked wooden bunks. And I wound up with the bunk at the top that was very close, and I could not sleep all night. It was just, it was so really I just felt like I was being smothered almost. And so ever since then, I've been very careful about small enclosed spaces, particularly over my head. Once I had to, my husband and I were sailing on the schooner. And we were bringing a schooner under sail from Providence, Rhode Island to New Bedford. It was a boat that he had brought across the Atlantic. And the bunk was just like this cabin, like forest. And I had to, I sort of pushed myself to the edge of it and kept the curtain open so that my head was out of the bunk, because I just could not abide being in a very tight space. But what's interesting, with your question, I've never used that in a book. And I think now I will.
Well, the first thing that occurs to me is in a former life, you were buried alive. Gotta be, Linda. Yeah. Ooh, okay. Let's go more cheerful. Favorite color and why?
My favorite color, purple. Absolutely, purple. I'm wearing it. I was trying to think back, and it goes back, I think, to when I was a teenager, and my sister and I shared a bedroom, and it had my parents' old furniture in it. And we were getting new furniture, and my mother said to us, "You can decorate the room however you want." And the furniture was this sort of white, sort of with little fancy, pastel flowers printed on it, black bedspread, and purple and orange cushions, like pillows put on the bed. And it was my first sort of statement, kind of separating me from my mother's sense of design and style. But that color purple just spoke to me in certain ways that it was very bold, and it was not at all a pastel.
Well, I find it fascinating that you had orange cushions on it, because this is one of my theories, is that most people who like purple don't like orange, and vice versa. So my next question, Linda, is what 3 movies would you take with you to a desert island? A desert island that has some strange ability to show movies.
The English Patient, Far from the Madding Crowd, and every single episode of all 5 seasons of Endeavor. And that's a little bit of cheating, but it's like a movie.
Cheating, but creative cheating. I like that. Okay. Most writers have a bad habit word when they're writing. I've already confessed, just and really are probably top on my list. What's yours?
Just was also one of them. Got, only, and some. I actually did a search in a couple of my manuscripts, and I found 250 instances, sometimes 2 and 3 on the page.
We all have them. So, do you have a childhood book that addicted you to stories?
The Secret Garden.
Oh, that's wonderful. I wonder if that, I noticed your movie picks have a definite English bent. And I wonder if The Secret Garden started you along that road.
Very well might have, and I think that it was such a departure from the life that I was living, and really sort of took me out of this sort of urban Italian neighborhood that I lived in, and it was very enlarging of my world when I read it for the first time.
Well, this sort of touches on a question that came from a reader, and her question was, where do your stories come from? I know one author who dreams her stories. Another has a character suddenly taking up residence in her head. So how are your beautiful stories born?
Sure. Certainly, I think a lot of the ideas for my stories come out of people I have encountered, or the stories that I have heard from them. Certainly the 2 Italian stories are based on conversations around the dinner table and memories of memories of my aunts, for example. But other sources, yes, doesn't last. I still have a lot of work to do, but just at the beginning there, that voice is what gets me started.
And is that necessarily at the beginning of the book, or is it just the beginning of your process?
It's both. I mean, in some instances, it's the beginning of the book. But quite often what I find is, and I'm finding it more and more as I write more books, that quite often those first words that I hear and that I put down on paper are not going to be the first words of the book.
But it's some core, it's some vision of who the character is. At
Exactly.
least for me, yeah.
Yeah.
And whatever comes in that first part, it can never change. Other things about the character might change or get explored or shifted, but those first moments are in stone. That's who they are. Yeah. I went to lunch earlier this week with a fellow author, and first of all, I was really surprised that she gave me the choice of where to sit, because I find most authors have a particular place they want to sit, and then I was really torn because I could tell one seat was going to let me see the whole restaurant, but the other seat was going to be a better eavesdropping spot. And in a way, this is research, listening to people and how people interact and the rhythm of dialogue and how that all comes together. But more formal research, how do you feel about that? Do you love it? Do you dread it? At what point in the book do you do it?
I actually love it. And sometimes I get myself a little bit too tangled up in it. I am
never happens.
No. So I just finished. I have sort of an amusing story to tell about research, and I do a lot of book research. I sort of, and librarians love me, and the research librarian in my local library just loves to see me walk in because she knows she's going to have the next book. But I was. I just finished a trilogy that's set on Chappaquiddick Island, which is off the coast of Martha's Vineyard. And the book was almost all written, but there were like little pieces of things that I wanted to be accurate about, because the book started in the 1940s, but there were still people around who remember things and would say, how sometimes people get really upset if you get even something very small in a detail wrong. So I spent the day on the island, and I had arranged with the Historical Society to use their library. And Bill was there and really happy to help me. And he had pulled out like bound copies of the newspapers. And I said to him, there's a scene, there's a sort of bar brawl. And I need the name of a bar in Edgartown. He looked at me and said, you can't set a bar brawl in Edgartown, because Edgartown was dry in the 19th. And which would have been a huge, just really huge mistake. So he said, let me see if I can help you. And he went to his computer. He said, we did some oral histories and we recorded. And sure enough, within the hour, he had dug up an oral history of some guy reminiscing about a bar in Oak Bluffs and gave me the name of the bar, and it was still in existence.
I was researching probably for my historical widow woman, but about the West. And I have more ideas for historicals. I have a couple out, but I haven't gotten to the other ones. But I got this great gift from a National Park Service librarian. I think it's the Museum of the West in St. Louis. And I was talking about trying to find out something very specific. And he said to me, the benefit you have of writing fiction is you don't have to write what did happen. You only have to write what could have happened. And I thought, yeah, yeah, that's exactly it. So you want to avoid the things that couldn't have happened, or just like you talked about, the readers are going to, and certainly I as a cranky reader, are going to be thrown out of the book and go, wait a minute. Like I read this romance once where they had the Kentucky Derby on the wrong day. And I was like, forget it. I'm not reading you. I can't trust you. So you don't want to do that ever, if at all possible. But we don't also have to say, as long as we're writing fiction, what precisely did happen. I thought that was a great gift.
And that's, it's very interesting because the book that I am, it is actually, it's about a real person. But I recognized, and this was a fairly recent recognition over the summer. I mean, I've been working on this book for years, and I had finally gotten gotten it together and gotten it to my editor, and I got the multi-page, single-spaced memo back from her. And I recognized this, I had sort of insight that I am not writing a biography, and I'm not even writing the life of. I am writing about some, this pivotal experiences in this woman that inform who she is, but I don't have to be, sort of starting at the beginning and working my way linearly, and also being able to, particularly in, there's not always everything available in terms of what happens in someone's life. And you can, as a writer of fiction, I can use those empty spaces and put in there, what I imagine could have happened. And I'm not bound to what did actually happen.
I found a book that was privately published, and it was the account of a woman who had gone on this Western trail in the late 1860s, I think. And it was fabulous. And this was another great gift, not only for her accounts of what happened, but it had both her diary and copies of her letters home. And the wonderful thing that I found is in her diary, she was much looser. and so that aspect of humanity and the reminder that she sort of cleaned up her reactions to some things where somebody that she maybe didn't like particularly had something happen to her, and in the diary it's like she deserved it, serves her right, and in the letter it's like, what a shame. And I thought, oh, this is a person. This is, so human. And that was another gift for me in research and reading things that people have written and trying to get a view into who they are from what they've written. And sometimes they're cleaning it up. So, okay, do you have a writing routine?
I do.
I knew you would.
I am disciplined.
You are disciplined.
I was not disciplined when I first started out. I'm very particular. Until I was 5, my family lived in an apartment over the office of where my father worked. It was his uncle's construction company. My father was the general manager, and at night, sometimes he would have to go downstairs to the office to do some work, and he would let me go with him. And there was this big metal cabinet in his office, and inside that metal cabinet were all the office supplies. And he would allow me to take out a ruled pad and a pencil, and I used to draw pictures before I was able to write, and then I would, when I first started writing, I would only write on those yellow pads. And I think now that I really understand sort of where that comes from, it's so interesting how we become attached to tools, and we see those tools as sort of helping the process. And the other thing that I do in terms of my process, which is absolutely key for me, is I have this little electronic timer that I set for 20 minutes. And I, as soon as I put the timer on, I turn it so I can't see the minutes ticking away. But I've trained myself when the timer is on, that's all I do is write. And I generally will do 3 20-minute sessions, and then I give myself a break. I'm just sort of barreling through any kind of block that I might have, or inability to get started. And it works like a charm.
And you don't have any hand problems with doing
No,
that?
I don't. I mean, I do sort of when I do after those 60 minutes, I sort of, flex my fingers a little bit. but I haven't so far, not on right here off my desk. That's not been an issue. One of the things I'm trying out right now, though, is a standing desk. Because there's all these issues about, particularly for people like us who sit at desks for a long time. So I'm really just like a week into having a standing desk. In fact, I'm standing right now because I haven't tried writing by hand yet. Standing because I'm not at that phase right now. I'm in the revision phase, so I'm working on the computer. But it's
okay. I have multiple questions off of this. So you handwrite the whole first draft.
Yeah, and then I type it into computer.
And then will you revise it again?
Oh yes. I would say most of my books go through at least 4 revisions. One of them went through 5. Yeah.
And are most of them from the beginning all the way through to the end, or do you dive in and do an area and then maybe pull back out and then?
I've written both ways. Sometimes I will, particularly I think if I'm feeling sort of stuck, I will write a chapter that I know, that's a little, maybe easier to get into, and then go back. I really did have to dig for it. Yeah.
I will also say the first time I wrote a trilogy, I thought I'd written a standalone book, and a friend read it and said, "Well, this is the middle book of a trilogy, don't you?" And I said, "You can't fool me. A trilogy has to have 3 books, and there's only 1 book, so it can't be a trilogy." And she said, "Go back and look at it, and you have all the pieces of the previous book are indicated in this one, and then you have to do this other character as the 3rd book." And she was right. I was stunned at how much my subconscious, I guess, had dropped in to that book. And I wrote the first book very quickly. But I write out of sequence, and not only within the book clearly, but I wrote a trilogy out of sequence, and I've done it since then too. But the point being of how much is there that you don't realize on the top level of consciousness, and then when you go back and read it, it's like, "Ooh, look at that little gift," and "Ooh, look at this, I got that too," and "Oh, there's that."
I thought I was writing a trilogy, but there is something in that 3rd book that I think probably could turn into a 4th book. And I started playing with it this summer, and I was really excited about it. It was like, wow, all right, there is this, this one character who is fairly important in the 2nd book, but it plays a relatively minor role in the 3rd book. And I thought, oh, it may be time to give her her own book,
And this answers a question that I had from a reader who asked if, as authors, do we miss the characters once we finished a book, and do we think about them? Because the reader's saying, yes, she does. She thinks about the characters when she's really liked a book and when she closed it. And then, does it ever lead to additional books? So, boom, there you are. Yep.
Yeah. And I did. And I find, particularly with trilogy, and I think because I had lived with these characters so long, that I really did miss them, and I missed this particular character especially.
To go back for a second, you're talking about your lined yellow pads and things, and I was thinking about tools. What's the best money you've ever spent as a writer?
Okay. I was thinking about this, and I think for me, it was the first writer's workshop. I only had one English-speaking friend. All of my other friends were German, and I basically, lived a German life. So I had one to bounce ideas off and to say, can you read this and tell me what you think? And I knew I had to be in Boston one summer, and I don't know even how I found this workshop because it was long before the internet. But there was a New Englanders workshop at Simmons College, and I signed up and got accepted, and spent a week and just immersing myself. And it was the first time that I got any validation as a writer, outside of my mother telling me, "Oh, that was beautiful," and it was also my first sort of dive into understanding about writing as a discipline.
Yeah. Well, that's huge because I often think we as writers there's sort of a sense. Sometimes I refer to non-writers as civilians, that they don't, as in many occupations, the people who are not in it don't understand, don't have that view of what you're going through. And I think with writers, there's also that way of thinking and way of looking at the world. So for me, the first conference was, oh boy, there are other people weird like me, But for you, where you were somewhere where it wasn't your native language, and then to come into, so you're coming back into English and then coming back into sort of your native language as a writer, that must have been such an immersion. Has your writing routine changed over the years? Did getting published change anything about your writing?
I think that the discipline issue and writing to deadline, before you get published, your deadlines are sort of your own and internal. And then suddenly you have external deadlines, which for me were very motivating. But I guess I'm a very driven person. And I think back when I was writing the first book, and my kids were small, and my husband would sometimes take Fridays off to give me a full day. I knew I had 8 hours, and my goal was always, by the time I left at 5:00, was to have 8 pages written. And I try to remember that hunger sometimes when I'm sitting down at my desk, or now standing at my desk, to not to get too complacent, I guess, is the key. But I think I certainly have learned an enormous amount about discipline. But the other thing I've learned, I do feel like with every book I have learned more, and I've gotten to be a better writer, and I'm a far better writer now than I was 10 years ago. And I think that I've always been open. I teach a lot of workshops in craft, but I'm always discovering new things. I have a much stronger voice now than I did. I'm much more confident in who I am as a writer. But I also think that I have a lot more about what makes good fiction since I've been writing myself.
Sometimes the opinions don't agree of what makes good fiction. And that has been one of the great lessons from the group, that you aren't going to please everybody. You're just not going to.
That's right. And it's such a personal connection to the words that it's, yeah.
Yeah. So in their process, what's the part that you like the best, and what's the hardest part for you?
Revision is the hardest part for me, and I say that because I'm in the midst of a very challenging revision right now. It's the hardest one I ever had, and I've because I'm just completely restructuring the book and rethinking my original premise, which is like, you get this reaction from your editor and these opinions, and I'm just like, oh, does she really want me to do all of that? And it's there. I've really felt overwhelmed by this sometimes, and I feel like I'm a person who likes to have a lot of structure, and I feel very unstructured in this revision,
Yeah.
and looking for ways to create some kind of structure for me. And I've just within the last couple of weeks found a way to do that, and I'm feeling much more, like I no longer feel like I'm drowning, and I'm sort of dog paddling now into revision. But I would say, sort of the best part for me is hearing the characters speak. For me, it's character, and that's what gives me the most joy and gets me light up, when I really feel like I understand who this character is, and I can weave their story. That's the exciting part.
So, did you always want to have do something that had to do with writing,
Yes.
or editing, or
Yeah,
did you
always.
always?
Probably from the time I was, maybe 8 or 9 years old.
But you also have a strong connection. Well, we all do with food. But I was thinking of that you often food plays a part in your stories. Did you ever think about doing other things with food or cooking?
Yeah, I had a dream to open a restaurant, which sort of got postponed, deferred, um, and when my editor said to me, "You always have all this stuff about food in your books. Have you ever thought about writing a book that really focuses on food?" And that's when I wrote Across the Table, which is about this family that had the restaurant. And I got to, I sort of vicariously run a restaurant through my characters. Um, and if I had not become a novelist, I think probably that's what I would have done, is open a restaurant. Yeah.
It seems to me a fair number of authors that I know have a strong connection with food in those ways. Do you see anything? Is it the creative process? Is there a connection there?
Well, I think there's um, certainly there's this I think a very cultural connection to food, and food is, I think, expressive of emotion and family and relationship, and there's so many
Uh,
sort of things tied tied up in food that I think relate. I think some of the most important scenes that I've written in my books take place around food.
there's that coming together of characters,
Yes,
um, a-
yes,
and and there's
um,
also I
yeah,
think um, the passing down of things from one generation to another, or to the one after that, over food, over the preparation, during the preparation of food, over recipes. Um, I think when I was a kid, and we would have come back from church on Sunday, and we'd sit around the table in the dining room, and we would talk for hours. We would have a toaster that we had at the end of the table, and we'd just keep making toast and and talking for hours. And when my siblings are older, so when they started having significant others from college who'd come and spend time with us, they were a little, well, what do you do on Sundays? Well, we make toast and talk. What do you mean, what do we do? So I have some questions that came specifically from readers, and then some on behalf of readers. So let me ask you. One reader asked, "What is your favorite place to write?" So where do you take your narrow lined notebooks, and why? And they want to know, does it have an inspirational view?
one of the reasons I wrote this book, Chappaquiddick, is because we spent our summer vacations on Chappaquiddick. It's a very isolated place. The cabin where we stayed, the cottage, had no electricity, so there was like no computer and TV, not even a radio. And it was surrounded on water on three sides. So I could sit on the porch and for hours a day with my pad, and that's where I wrote. Um, and it still is, sort of a place of just absolute peace and
Oh,
beauty.
that's a great place. And you would do far better there than I, because I need the plug. So this next question is especially for those authors who are traditionally published. When the cover or image doesn't match the character description, a pet peeve of mine, says this reader, how does it feel for the author?
It feels,
It feels such a way that we'd have to bleep out a lot. I wonder if more so for someone like you who has background in art, as opposed, I always have opinions about it, but I can't draw a straight line with a ruler. So I think that the difficult thing is it is about marketing, and yet it's so it's such an emotional reaction, not only for the author but clearly for the readers, as this reader is saying. They invest in the characters, they connect with the characters, they have envisioned who the character is. I always figure if the cover is different from how I've envisioned the character, the cover's wrong. It's just, it's just wrong. I got to be right. So we have another wonderful question from a reader. If you could write a book with any author, alive or dead, who would you want to work with and why?
I would say Margaret Atwood would be one of them. Yeah. I began reading her book when I was probably in my 20s. And they were just very, very powerful for me as a young woman. And helping me start seeing myself in a different light, and helping me to become sort of just, be brave, I guess would be the word, to have more courage. And so I think and I think having courage as a writer, I think as I get older and I'm more willing to take risks as a writer. What I saw in Margaret Atwood was someone who was not fearful at all. And I thought, wow, I want to be like that.
What a great compliment to her, too. I think that's wonderful. I love that. Somebody who has never read your work, which book would you recommend as a kind of good entry spot for them to come into your writing and into your world?
I would say that that first book, Dancing on Sunday Afternoons, which is the book that's based on my grandparents' love letters. And can I tell you an amusing story about it?
Oh, yes, right. Absolutely.
It has to do with marketing. So I get this call from a newspaper reporter, and she said, I've just been assigned to write an article, and I understand you've written 2 books. One is the Harlequin romance, and one is about the Lawrence Mill strike. So I said, I think you're mistaken. They're both the same book. And she was like, sort of taken aback that a Harlequin romance could actually be about something as important and serious as the Lawrence Mill strike.
You probably could have just ended it with "is about something."
Right. It's exactly, yes.
A lot of
so we went on to have a very interesting conversation, and she did, and she put in the article, how surprised she was to be doing something like that. And so about 2 weeks after the article came out, I get this email from the director of the Lawrence Historical Society, who had, she said she had Google alerts anytime the Lawrence Mill strike was mentioned, and that my book had popped up, and we had this long conversation, and she wound up taking, the book in the Lawrence Historical Society library. And the conversation that we had was how quite often conveying history is so much more accessible when it's in a novel than in a book of history about the Lawrence Mill strike, which some people might see as, sort of not something that they would want to understand. But
So sort of the other side of that, what's a good place for people to start reading your books is, do you have any of your books that you would consider a hidden gem? I like to say a book that even your loyal readers might have overlooked to this point.
Yeah, so the book that's set in Cold War Germany, I think is like the novella itself is called The Hand That Gives the Rose. And again, it's one of those books that sort of takes a moment in history and its impact on individual lives. The heroine is a young woman who takes over the management of her family's vineyards unexpectedly, which is not what she had wanted to do, but her father has a stroke and her mother can't handle the vineyard by herself.
And where can readers find out more about these books and your other books and about you?
So there's obviously my website, which is lindacardillo.com.
And that's CARDILLO.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's certainly lots of information about me and all of the books, and you'll find there's excerpts of all of my books.
Oh, great.
Yeah. And there's also recipes, because food is so important to me. I actually did a cookbook a few years ago based on my 2 Italian books. And so there's little excerpts from the 2 Italian books and recipes of the foods that are mentioned in the books. You can get that on the website too. But and then of course, all of my books are available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and Apple.
Before I hit you with the kind of epilogue questions, is there anything I should have asked you that I haven't? That's always my favorite question as a journalist. Got some great stuff. Not that I'm putting pressure on you or anything, Linda.
You can ask me what I read for fun, and that's
good. Let's hear what you read for fun.
I read medieval mystery stories.
Well, fun might not have been the right word, but I'll have to look into those. Okay, so here we go with some rapid fire. Dog or cat?
Dog.
Tea or coffee?
Tea.
Cruise or backpacking?
Backpacking.
So sailboat or motorboat?
Sailboat.
Best china or paper plates?
Oh, best china.
Ooh, okay. Mustard or ketchup?
Mustard.
Leggings or sweats?
Leggings.
Toenail polish or bare toenails?
Toenail polish.
Cake or ice cream?
Cake.
And let's wrap up with save the best for last or grab the best first.
Save the best for last.
This has been a lot of fun, Linda. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it, and hope all you listeners will come back next week for another edition of Authors Love Readers. That's the show for this week. Hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for joining Authors Love Readers podcast. Remember, you can always find out more about our guest authors in the show notes, and you can find out more about me at www.patriciamclinn.com. You can also send in questions to be asked of future authors at podcast@authorslovereaders.com. Until next week, wishing you lots of happy reading. Bye.